Very good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a very good morning to Mr. Sachin Pilot and Mr. Sunjay Kapur. We have a conversation today, and I would hope to make this fun for everyone, as well as for Mr. Pilot. Sachin, if I may. Sachin doesn't need any introduction. As the compere just said, he is a very accomplished political leader, but he's also a student of management. He's graduated from the finest of institutions, both St. Stephen's and Wharton, which is also my alma mater, which I may say. But Sachin has had a great legacy in politics already at such a young age. He's a youth icon and has headed many ministries and has accomplished much. Each of us in corporate here have felt his impact through his Companies Act, as well as the implementation of CSR and women on boards, etc. But today, we have a conversation with Sachin around India and its role in a multipolar world. While a multipolar world is the reality of today, Sachin, it's based on a great power rivalry between the United States and China, which is centered around technology. It's never been more apparent than now, especially after hearing the Trump-Harris debates of yesterday, that there is an unequivocal rivalry between the United States and China as far as the US is concerned. And there is an unequivocal support for India at this current point in time. And geopolitics is a very, well, the way that I see it is very straight. They talk about interests. They talk about how they are working for their own interests, much like how India says currently that we would deal with Russia and we deal with our own interests. So I hope that we could delve into a little bit about how you feel what India's role could be in this multipolar world, especially given the constraints of interests and how we define those interests. What is the time frame within which those interests are really to be judged? And of course, those interests are dependent on politics. In a democracy like us, we base our decisions on the populace of who we represent. So what are those interests in politics? Now, to wear a different hat of your management, how do you see the management of politics, and how do we see the politics growing in this age of rivalry, which is based on technology, such as artificial intelligence? Do we see those aspects coming into the facets of politics? But lastly, what I'd like to come to you on is about the citizens that are represented in politics. What are their aspirations, and how do we feel those can be met in this world of uncertainty in geopolitics and geoeconomics, but where the trends of further digitization and artificial intelligence are very apparent? So to start off with, Sachin, could I get your views on where do you see India within this multipolar world? How do you see our interests? Where do you think our priorities should be? And where do you see the direction for us in the next several years?
Thank you very much, Nikhil, for inviting me here and for a very kind introduction. Thank you very much indeed. Good morning to all of you. Nikhil has thrown a whole bunch of questions, very pertinent and important questions. Let me just start off by saying that you spoke about geopolitics and India's space as we move forward. One thing I believe that we keep talking about soft power of India. There is no soft power if you don't have hard power. It's as simple as that. And hard power really is defined by your economic strength, by your military power, and by your voice in the world. Now, increasingly, India is finding a much larger platform on multilateral issues, on global issues, and we have to play that role. The challenge is upon us, how we shape that, and you're absolutely right. Our domestic politics, our own polity will define the direction, the way forward, the agendas, the challenges, the opportunities, and the successes. And in Indian politics, what I think we should do really is, we should do politics for maybe 30% of the time that you're in government. 70% of the time should be for governance. Governance about delivery, governance about shaping foreign policy, governance about meeting, like you said, the aspirations of most of our citizens. And if you're able to do that, we're a very robust democracy. We just had a general election. We all know the results of it. It has proven to the world that Indian democracy is thriving, is resilient, and it is ready to take on a global challenge. Geopolitics, and it really should be shaped ideally by self-interest. Every nation's foreign policy self-serves first and then on a larger issue. Now, in my view, Nikhil, where a country wants to be and where it should be is defined by its foreign policy. How to get to that aim and how to get to that objective is diplomacy. And foreign policy is not a huge political issue in this country, but as India grows in its size and scale and influence, we're increasingly being looked upon as a nation that has a voice that people want to hear, but we must also hold ourselves to certain standards. We have to be able to call out when we think things are wrong. It's such an uncertain world. Last few years, we've seen the COVID crisis. We've seen multiple now conflicts in Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, and many such issues that are hampering us. So here is a time where, like you said, the traditional rivalry last decade has been the US and China. But I think I would not be out of place to say that India is certainly going to play a much larger role, not only because we are neighbors of China, but because we uphold certain principles and certain issues that matter to the people of the world. Every fifth person in the world is an Indian person. So what we have to do as a country is to make ourselves stronger as we go on. We'll have differences, Nikhil, in politics. As you know, when we fight elections, we counter each other on issues, we debate, we deliberate, we oppose, sometimes very vehemently. But the slight concern that I have is that you can oppose, you can challenge, you can criticize, but you have got to be able to hold yourself to certain standards. I keep saying this wherever I go, that I would not like to hear, I wouldn't like to say things about other people that I wouldn't want to hear for myself. So sometimes in our domestic discourse, we really cross the line. And this is something the younger people are seeing and observing much more than ever before. And we have to be very mindful of what sort of a political discourse we're presenting to the nation, to the younger generation. If you're able to consolidate, we have many gains. We have all the right ingredients for us to, from here, become a launching pad to be one of the top ranking nations in the world. I have absolutely no doubt about it. And any nation whose young people have faith in its future, can reach anywhere. I know many countries where people are moving out, people are despondent, people are not so gung-ho about their own country's future, and that leads to demotivated, underperforming individuals, which leads to a societal dysfunctional. And India is certainly not there. I see a lot of young people say that today's young generation are not nationalistic enough, are not ambitious enough, are not driven enough. Not true. People in India want to perform, and we as policymakers, we as politicians really have a much larger role than just to fight and win elections.
I'd like to come to the youth a little bit later in our conversation, but just sticking to the geopolitics and India's position in it. You talked about shared values. That's been a theme that a lot of governments use in terms of aligning each other. What does that mean, shared values? We say that we're all democratic institutions. What does that mean? What does shared values mean, and how does that actually translate in thought and practice, in your opinion?
I think shared values are freedom of speech, liberty, democracy, freedom of press. All these are, any functional republic, any democratic nation state has to believe in all these. These are fundamentals. But I must say that there are nation states, and there are governments who profess solidarity towards these issues, but actually practice otherwise. It won't be fair for me to call out countries and governments, but I think as an Indian, as a country that has a rich tradition, that has actually demonstrated by action for thousands of years and several decades post-independence, that we are a country that has really held itself to a very transparent accountability systems in the world. So shared values of empathy, of compassion, etc., are human values. But for governments, for nations, for countries, it has to be about how you take stands, how you take sides, how you're able to differentiate between good and bad. It can't be that when my friend or my ally does something wrong, I ignore it, and when it suits me, I go and bomb some other nation. That can't be it. And I think the global reality is that the world order has to change. The current UN system, for example, has almost failed. It's not functioning the way it was supposed to post Second World War. There's not a single African nation on the Security Council. India is not on the Security Council. These are all realities that we have to confront and take friends and allies to make sure that, things turn the way that we want them to turn.
No, I agree with you. The United Nations is, and especially the Security Council, is not representative, especially of India and the global south. But other institutions such as the WTO has been weaponized by countries like China. It's pretty ineffective now, to the extent that bilateral treaties are the rule of the game. But it has a geopolitical flavor to it. China has a very distinct style in terms of how it operates politically and economically, and how they bully their neighbors. What is your view on how India's current policy or future policy should be towards China, which very frankly has a time frame, in my opinion, which exceeds any domestic policy economic agenda?
But to be completely honest, I don't think we've handled China as well as we should have. Last few years, there's been a certain animosity against China for whatever it's done or not done. And we, as an immediate neighbor, have our own issues on the border, bilateral issues, etc., incursions on our land. I don't think we've done as much as we should have done, because we are the natural alternative to any right-thinking nation about who it wants to trade with, who it wants to align politically with. I don't think we've done enough in that direction. And let me tell you, no world body, whether it's UN, IMF, World Bank, is non-political. Everything is political. I said in the beginning, there is no soft power without hard power. And China has actually exercised that to the fullest extent. Look at the way they have tried to influence nations in the African Union, in the CIS countries, in the Caucasus, in Eastern Europe, and even rogue nation states such as North Korea and other ones. So China is doing all that it can to change the paradigm of the great game that's being played out. But have we done enough to counter that, to become the natural alternative choice for global bodies, for large nations? Not yet. I think we haven't done that enough. And we have to change the rules of the game, because if we don't do that now, a decade later it'll be too late.
But the reality is that our trade balance with China keeps growing. The Indian consumer loves Chinese product, and especially the price point at which they come. So is it fair for the Indian consumer to be denied in its short term what his aspirations may be for a Xiaomi phone or a equivalent car or whatever it may be?
Nikhil, I don't think the demand-supply curve can actually determine the way a society or a country thinks and looks ahead. I don't think price points can determine national interest. While I think consumers must get benefit of the best price points that can be made available, but it can't be. If you ask people, is national security more important? Is India's position in the global paradigm more important than getting a 5% cheaper mobile phone? I think you'll get your answer. So I think there's an industry pressure, there's a consumer pressure, but look at other countries, what they've done. Look at Europe, look at US. They've taken strong measures against, the predatory pricing that China does, the dumping that China does. So we have to also align ourselves to what the global view of China is. I'm not against any country. I think we are neighbors, and like someone said, you can choose your friends, you can't choose your neighbors. We have to live with the neighbors we have. But can we be more proactive in containing the influences? Can we be a real counterbalance? Can we live up to the expectations that the Western world and the US has of India in South Asia, in Asia? Are we doing enough to counter the Beijing, Russia sort of, coming together? Are we doing that enough? Are we challenging people on the right platform? In fact, just our own borders, I think, Nikhil, is important to state. We should come out clean about what's happening on our borders. There have been reports of incursions from Chinese troops for so long, and we've heard either denial or absolutely no answers. So we must be able to stand front. And I think when it comes to national interest, all political parties are together. If you recall, there was an attack on Parliament when Vajpayee was Prime Minister. That was an attack on India. Every single political party stood by the government of the day and said, you do what it takes to take people to task. And even today I say, whether we are in opposition or government, Every citizen, every political party, every ideology is absolutely unanimously united when it comes to nation, India, security. So I think people who are in charge of affairs should take advantage of that. You'll have a domestic quibbles. झगड़ा थोड़ा बहुत होगा निखिल आपस में होता है हम लोगों का. But when it comes to India, when it comes to supporting our national team, supporting our heroes at the Olympics, supporting our soldiers in uniform, there is absolutely no doubt in anyone's mind that we all stand as united as ever.
No, I must also point out that I believe that you are a colonel in the Indian Army, and
I'm not a colonel yet.
Sorry.
I'm going to become a major first. So I joined the army, Territorial Army in 2012, and just a very quick note on this one because you mentioned it. My grandfather was in the army, but he was not very educated, so he was a non-commissioned officer. He retired as Havaldar. And my father, late father, was determined to go beyond what my grandfather was, so he became a fighter pilot in the Air Force and resigned to join public life. And I was thinking to myself some years ago that my grandfather was in the armed forces, my father was in the armed forces, and I went to an Air Force school. So I had that whole armed forces defense background, and I wanted to also become a part of that. So I joined the TA, but not as a ceremonial sort of, they give these posts out to a lot of celebrities, etc. I went the whole 9 yards. I did the exam. I went to the SSB. I got my full commission in 2012, and I was in the government of India at that time. So it became a bit of a problem because as a minister in the government of India, your protocol is higher than those in the army. And I was not getting a commission by the defense minister, Mr. Antony, who was defense minister. And but I finally got my commission, and I'm serving now in the 124 Sikh unit of the TA, which is housed near India Gate. But I'm very happy that I was able to don the olive uniform as a third generation. So I'm quite happy and proud about that. And hopefully I'll become colonel soon.
Many congratulations on that, and thank you for everyone here, and thank you for your service. Sachin, but you bring up a nice segue to move from geopolitics and the interests of nations in terms of determining foreign policy to interests in what I would say is your profession, politics. We're sitting in the All India Management Association, which is the apex body for management, but it is also the spokesman for the Indian manager and leader. And here we delve upon subjects through the lens of management principles, and you yourself have studied at the finest of institutions. What is the view of politicians themselves, and what is the view of political parties with theories of management? Do they ascribe to them? Do we look at organizational structures in any manner? What is the evolution of this? And what is your personal view on this subject? I'd like to then move on from that subject, so my chain of thought would be to move into some more pointed questions on problems that face Indian corporates and how those may be akin in political parties, such as family succession or the motivation over multiple generations to be aligned towards management principles. And then lastly, I'd like to then come to your views on the aspirations of the Indian youth.
So you're right. I think it's a tough one. How do you align principles of management, good governance, etc., on political parties? A good manager doesn't have to belong to a corporate entity. A good manager could work for an NGO, could work for the government, could work for any agency in the world. It's the traits of the individual that matter, and the surroundings that you recognize and can deftly adapt to. In politics, the reaction time is 1 millisecond. In the boardroom, you have multiple views. You can solicit ideas. You can act upon it, and your efforts and your ROE, the return on effort, is what it is. But in politics, sometimes it's things and circumstances beyond your control. You do your best, but your talent, your hard work, your motivation, your results sometimes may not align with the rewards that you get. So when you come into public life, you have to be very mindful that it's not quid pro quo. You will not get rewarded for exactly what you've done because there are other forces at play. You talked about generational shifts in families, in the corporate sector and in public life, in politics. There I have to say it's a lot more tougher than transferring shares or appointing somebody on the board. You may have some pushback, but ultimately, the shareholding will prevail. In public life is different because it's not the board members or the shareholders, it's the actual constituents and citizens which decide whether you're capable to run for office or not, whether you will get voted in or not. And if you get voted in once, there is no guarantee that if you don't perform, you'll get voted back in again. In the corporate sector, as long as you have good managers, and I see now a lot of families have just become owners and they're given the management of it to CEOs and MDs, etc., and they hire professionally, which is another way of doing it. But in politics, it can't be done. You can't outsource. You have to go to the people. You have to, every 5 years, fold your hand and ask for another 5 years. So it's much more testing in that sense. I won't say it's more satisfying, but yes, certainly you feel a sense of achievement if you are able to deliver on certain things. Small things, Nikhil. It's not really about changing India, but in your own constituency, in people that you have influence over, if you can negotiate and you can implement even a small change of just drinking water facility or a roadway connectivity or a school or infrastructure project, it gives you that satisfaction. It's difficult to compare, and I think one should not compare. I think everybody works hard, but one thing stands true. If you have integrity, if you're honest, if you're hardworking, no matter what profession you follow, whether it's being a politician or being a good manager, people will see it. And no good work or hard work ever goes to waste. So ultimately, if you're diligent and you're working hard, वो हिंदी में कहावत है कि जब दूध को उबालते हैं तो मलाई जमती है, जब दूध ठंडा होता है तो मलाई हमेशा ऊपर ही आती है. So ultimately, you will prevail and you'll come out on top if you keep persistently working hard.
No, I've seen that with you. You are a tremendously hard worker, and very frankly, Sachin returned from Armenia this morning on a 12-hour flight with a 6-hour layover. So thank you very much for being here and keeping to your commitment. But Sachin, in this day and age of very vast and very quick technology changes, businesses are adopting that change very quickly. How do you see politics changing both with technology as well as with thought? The principles of leadership and accountability are very clear, and you've alluded to them very well. But how do you see that changing with the nature of technology? Do you see citizens demanding more from a sense of accountability from the politicians, given the changes that are happening in society with these technologies?
So I think one must understand, Nikhil, and I think all of you also, I'll just take 1 minute. When we think of politicians, and all of you do, I'm sure, somehow we tend to think that politicians have either come out from outer space or from underground. Politicians actually come from the same schools and colleges and gullies and mohallas and towns and villages that we all live in. So it's not that politicians are different species. We're all the same human beings with the same, fears and insecurities and likes and dislikes that all of us have. So sometimes you always tend to think, wo neta log hai, they're just a different commodity or a different set of individuals. That's not true. We're all basically cut from the same cloth. And to answer your question, times have really changed. I've seen in my own 25 years of public life, the expectations, the citizens, the voters, like you said, much more demanding and very short-tempered. So the anti-incumbency kicks in much quickly now because people are aspirational. Everybody's on the go. Everybody wants fast delivery, quick reactions, quick fixes. And that's demanding on the system because there are only limited resources to deliver everyone's expectations. Technology has changed the entire ecosystem of how politicians operate, how we campaign, how we communicate. 15, 20 years ago, it was newspapers and televisions. Then became cable television, then satellite television, mobile phones, internet, now YouTube, Instagram, social media. So when society changes, politicians have to adapt accordingly. And if you don't, then you pretty much get voted out. If you're not able to align with the changed mindset and with the younger people, how this country has progressed. And ultimately, when you have to make policies, Nikhil, you have to understand, you have to connect to the wavelength of the people you're making policies for. It just can't be the same bureaucratic functioning of churning old policies with new names. You have to understand the reality of today's India. How do you do that? By meeting, interacting, connecting, understanding and supporting what people want. So expectations from politicians have increased dramatically. It's good that people are being made to account and are held answerable for what they say. And I think all political parties and all politicians, when we say something, it must be held to account. And I think even the courts have said about this, that manifestos can't just be an announcement and then you forget about it. This is serious business, and our words must mean something. Political parties' commitments must resonate in the hearts and minds of people. So people have to have faith in what politicians say. If we don't have faith in what netas are saying, then really it's not doing justice to our democracy. And how do you do that? By being credible. The single currency that works at all times, in all corporate sectors, in all politics, is credibility. If you don't have credibility, then you can say what you want, you can do what you want, it counts for nothing.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to open the floor up for questions. So if you could start gathering your questions, and we'll have someone take some mics around. But before that, I'll ask Sachin a question, and maybe after that, if Sunjay, you have a question, you could also ask Sachin. So Sachin, last thing I want to end with is what you were alluding to right now, which is the aspirations of the youth and aspirations of the voters. What is your personal view on the jobs is essential, that is an essential need for our young demographic. There seems to be a slow growth in the formal sector jobs. There are many more jobs which are happening in the informal sector and in areas such as construction. What is your view on the individual aspiration of the new voter or of the existing voter, and how do you think that that could be bridged by you personally, and I don't mean by your party?
It's a very obvious thing that what's really hurting the most today are two things, in my view. Is the income disparities in this country, the K-shaped growth, the Gini coefficient, whatever you want to call it, but the disparity between villages and cities, rich and poor, has increased tremendously. It's a cause of great worry. There are still hundreds of millions of people, hundreds of millions of people who are not making enough to make two ends meet. And we're adding billionaires every week almost. That's a big concern, I think, for the country. Second, of course, is employment. Now it's unemployment, and what is worse is underemployment. You have a qualified young man or woman who is gainfully employed, but very underemployed according to his or her skill sets or qualifications. Now that's very, very demotivating for a young person when you've done a good degree or 2 degrees or a master's degree, and then you have to work in a place because you're forced to take up that job. So that's very underwhelming for a family and for young people especially. So jobs certainly remain one of the biggest concerns, and I'm not saying it because it's a political issue, it's a reality today. That are our young people getting enough avenues, enough platforms to at least live up to their potential? Sadly, we are not. What do we have to do? We have to go back to manufacturing. I see no other space, because you can't have people from the farmlands move straight to AI and engineering and service sector. They have to go through this cycle of shop floor, manufacturing, and then move up the cycle. So we have to really focus on manufacturing as a country, and industry that can be transitional. So from agriculture to agro-based, small scale, the powerhouse of European countries, for example, in Germany, most jobs are given not by large corporations or blue chip companies. It's a small and medium enterprises that actually employ 70, 50, 100 people. And they're really the engines for growth in that country. So in India, we have to start looking at micro and small industries, manufacturing entities, so that young people can get absorbed into that sector.
Okay. Sanjay, do you...
Thanks, Nikhil, and Sachin, thanks so much for addressing us and sharing your views, and very candid views, and for making it after a long flight. So I'm going to go back to geopolitics for a minute, because from a business perspective, 3 or 4 years ago, if you asked me, what do you do about geopolitics? I'd say nothing, because I never thought about it. It never occurred to us. We never understood it, and we didn't address the issue. Today, it's becoming more and more apparent with all the conflict in the world and all the choices and positions countries are taking. And my question really goes back to China. And you talked about China +1, you talked about us leveraging the opportunity. I come from the automotive industry, and unless you invest heavily in tech, you're not going to leverage the opportunity of China Plus when it'll go away. It'll go to Indonesia and the Far East, etc. However, at the same time, I don't think we can ignore China. And that's something that, continuously is discussed in terms of let's leverage what's happening outside of China. But if I go back again to the automotive industry, there's a 20 million vehicle population that I cannot ignore. And what do we do as a country, and as business in the country, to make sure we don't ignore that opportunity of playing in China, as opposed to just being the plus one? That's right.
But the obvious answer, Sanjay, is that India has not a small marketplace. So I think we have to leverage that also with China. A lot of Chinese goods come to India and we have our policies, etc. But you're right in two accounts. One is that if we don't invest enough in tech and give the kind of opportunities that manufacturing requires, the jobs and the companies will go to Vietnam or Indonesia or Thailand, which they have post-COVID. A lot of money was pulled out of China, but we were hoping to get a large chunk of that investment. It didn't happen. It went to other South Asian countries, the ASEAN countries. You're right, and I said in the beginning, it's not about countering China or opposing it. It's about managing and containing it, containing the negative fallouts of the geopolitical attempts to encircle India. They're buying up assets in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, Pakistan, and creating all sorts of issues for the future, sea lane and shipping and trade routes, etc. That's one, that's the policy and geopolitics. But the economics of it is that we have to engage. It's one of our largest trading partners. We have a huge deficit in terms of trade deficit. But we have to also use India as a large market, and we can counter that. Money will come from private sector, investments for tech, and I think the government of India should really open itself up to the challenge of adopting new age technologies, because unless we do that, redundancy will set in. We already have huge issues in manufacturing. If we don't have proper technology and long-term sustainable sort of policy framework for manufacturing, we can't compete. It's very competitive. It's not easy. And I take your point that even in your own sector, you have a very large market, but we're way behind some of the larger countries in Asia in terms of manufacturing, especially for auto sector. So I completely agree with you. We have to invest in tech and technology and look ahead. But times are changing. We can't wait for the government and every government bureaucrat and policymaker to help you sort your issues out. You have to take the initiative and push and prod, and we can do the best we can from being in the opposition. We can knock on them and make sure that we have the best policies that they can make.